Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to his disciples, "Truly I tell you, if two of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where two or three are gathered in my name, I am there among them." The Gospel of the Lord. Good evening, everybody. You're in great voice. One direction in your heart. Though I still think I have a few One Direction fans among the altar servers. A couple of notices. Confessions continue to be heard before and after all sessions from the Novena. Tomorrow at 11:30 in the morning and 2:30 in the afternoon. There's the special healing Mass with the anointing for those who are sick and elderly. And if you can help in bringing others to or from that Mass, or those Masses at 11:30 and 2:30, we'd be very grateful. At all of the other sessions tomorrow, we'll be delighted to have two guest speakers, Bobby Herdman and Christopher Smith, who will speak as young lay people about the Redemptorist missionary vocation. Then tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock, Archbishop Eamon Martin will celebrate the 6 p.m. Mass, and there will be the Clonard folk group from Belfast singing at the 6 and 7:30 Masses tomorrow evening. So that's happening tomorrow. And as you leave the church, if you haven't one of these little brochures already, please make sure to get one. It gives all the events tomorrow and also the Sunday Mass times, which are a little bit different, as you remember if you come regularly to the Novena. I just got a moment or two of the three wise men preparing for the Ireland-Germany match. Talking to Bill O'Hurley, and I was thinking of three other wise men sitting in a pub on a Friday night. And this was their regular haunt. They solved the problems of the world over a few pints on Friday night, sitting at the same three spots at the bar. So this particular night, our three wise men are thinking about the most important scientific advances of the last 100 years. So they're wrapping their minds around this, the most important scientific advances over the past 100 years. So Tom starts off and he says, "Well lads, I'll tell you now for me, it's very simple. Heart bypass surgery. That's the most important scientific advance over the last 100 years. And you know, I have a living example of it. 4 years ago, I had a heart attack, had to go in and I got a quadruple heart bypass. And sure, if it wasn't for heart bypass surgery, it would have been curtains for me." So the other two boys kind of listened and nodded their heads and thought for a moment and took a little drop of whatever they had in front of them. And then the second fellow, Mick, said, "Well now, Tom, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. As you know now, I've been having kidney dialysis for the last 3 years, 3 times a week. And I think kidney dialysis is the most important scientific advance of the last 100 years. Sure, if it wasn't for the kidney dialysis, it would have been curtains for me." So the third boy decided to take his time. So he took a good drink of the pint in front of him, and he kind of thought, and then he says, "Well lads, I'll tell you, I have the answer to it. I'll tell you what it is. The most important scientific advance in the last 100 years was Venetian blinds." And the two boys are looking at him. "Venetian blinds?" "Yeah," he said, "if it wasn't for Venetian blinds, it would have been curtains for all of us." Yes. Have many of you heard of Les Miserables? Les Mis. Give me just a signal if you have. Oh yeah, lots of people have. You've heard of Les Mis or Les Miserables. It's a very famous musical, and I don't know how many million people have seen it in London, and New York, and all over the world, in Dublin, and throughout the world. And there was a recent film of it that many millions saw as well. And there are at least 3 other films of it. And it's all based on a book by a man called Victor Hugo. And it was written in French. And Les Miserables, the miserable, or those who are in misery, sounds like heavy-duty stuff. But actually it's a really positive book with a great message. And it's not about misery. If anything, it's actually about redemption. There's a very positive message of redemption. And even if you haven't seen it, I just want to mention the main character was a man called Jean Valjean. I want to use him as an example later on. So we'll come back to Les Mis in a minute. I hear a little lady gurgling there, and I suspect that she has been baptized. And those of you who were here a few days ago, I think when I was talking about baptism, I said that probably everybody in the church was baptized. And I suspect almost everybody. At the 6:30 session, there was one little baby who was due for baptism next week. So there was just one person who wasn't baptized in the church. But anyway, we're talking about baptism during these days. And each one of us, when we're baptized with this oil of chrism. So this oil of chrism is put on our foreheads in the christening or the baptism ceremony. And the priest says, I now anoint you with the chrism of salvation. As Christ was anointed priest, prophet, and king, so may you live always as a member of his body, sharing everlasting life. So, we are anointed as priest, prophet, and king in our baptism, in our christening. And where does that threefold priest, prophet, and king come from? Well, it comes from theology. And theologians tell us that Jesus had three tasks. He had three jobs that he needed to do in his time here on earth. He was priest, he was prophet, and he was king. So what does it mean to say that Jesus was priestly? Well, we say Jesus was priestly because we mean Jesus made sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice. He sanctified, he made holy. So Jesus was priest. Jesus was prophet. Jesus taught and he preached. But in his preaching and his teaching, he revealed God. So prophecy for Jesus wasn't so much predicting the future as revealing God in the preaching and the teaching that he did. And Jesus was king. Jesus came to rule, to govern, but he was a different type of king. He didn't come on Air Force One. He came on a donkey to Jerusalem, and he was a king who washed feet. He was a servant leader. So we speak of Jesus as priest, prophet, and king. And when we were baptized into that priestly, prophetic, and kingly life of Jesus. And so those are three cores of our baptism, to be priestly, prophetic, and kingly. So I want to give you some examples of folks that I think live out those baptismal cores. I want to start with the priestly dimension. Now, you've probably guessed from my accent, I'm not from Dundalk. I'm from Limerick, I'm from Munster. And in Munster we say, you know, we're Irish by birth, but Munster by the grace of God. And I realise I'm in Leinster here, and Leinster is a wonderful province, but Munster people think it's by the grace of God we were born. So anyway, in Munster we have a passing interest in things like rugby. And there's one particular man who plays for the Munster rugby team, and he sometimes plays for Ireland, and his granny died last December, just before Christmas. And this is a true story, because I know the family, and it was this man who plays for Munster in Ireland, it was his aunt who told me the story. Anyway, there were two of his first cousins, this rugby player, two of his first cousins in UL before Christmas. And they were studying for exams. And they were inside the library, one a few benches or tables away from the other, preparing for exams after Christmas. So one of them has the phone on silent, and he sees a message from his mum to say that Granny has died. So he decides to go over to the cousin, a few tables away, and he goes over to the cousin and he says, just got a message, Granny has died. So the two boys go off to the coffee shop in UL, or one of the coffee shops, and they sit down and they start talking about Granny. And as they're chatting, one of the was late teens, early 20s, says to the other, he says, I've never told anybody this. And he reached into his pocket and he took out a rosary bead. And he said, Granny gave me that. And I always carry it around with me, especially when I'm doing exams or preparing for exams, because it helps me to feel confident or safe that somebody's praying for me. And lo and behold, the other fella reached into his pocket and produced a rosary bead. And he said, well, Granny gave me one too. And I suppose what I want to say is that I think that grannies and granddads are a great invention. And when I think about people who sanctify and make sacrifice, I think one of the groups of people I'd like to draw attention to tonight are grandparents. Because many grandparents know what it's like to make sacrifice. During this time of recession, I suspect that many families, many young parents, wouldn't manage if it wasn't for the grannies and granddads looking after the children, doing the taxi service or whatever. They make sacrifices even in their senior years, but they also sanctify, because sometimes the mummies and daddies aren't actually going to Mass or particularly interested in faith matters. And the grannies and granddads bring the grandchildren to Mass and instruct their grandchildren in the faith. So I think that that's a very good example of people who live out the priestly dimension of the baptismal calling or of the baptismal commitment. Let me move on to the prophetic. The prophetic dimension is about preaching and teaching and revealing God. Let me tell you about my son. I went off in June with my father and my sister for a week's holiday. And every afternoon I'd go for a walk, and there were hills nearby, and I was walking in these hills. And one particular day, anyway, I was jumping over a gully, as I thought, but didn't I fall into the gully and do a lovely somersault down into the gully, and I managed to break 5 bones. My sister, full of sympathy and nurse, said to me, you think you're 25 still, don't you? She said, you're not. You're twice that age. You should have more sense. Anyway, full of sympathy, I ended up in the hospital. And I had to have a little pin put in my thumb. So they counted me out for that. And I woke up in St. Vincent's in Dublin in the recovery ward, I think is what you call it. So there they are, kind of waking me up inside the recovery ward. And I see 3 Indian nurses. And they begin to talk to me about who I am, my name, and what am I? I'm a priest. Oh, you're a priest. And they tell me all about their children and what schools they're bringing their children to and what schools they think their young babies will go to so that they'll get a good Christian upbringing. So here I am in the recovery ward chatting to 3 Indian nurses about the faith. And then I'm wheeled up into the ward and I meet 3 Filipino nurses. And they said, oh yeah, you're a priest. Well, we go to the Novena, or before we came to Ireland, we went to the Novena in Baccarat, in Manila. And here I am, lying in the bed, and I'm saying to myself, isn't this extraordinary? These nurses in the recovery ward from India, these nurses here in this ward from the Philippines, and they're in some ways preaching and teaching in this hospital through the witness of their life. They're talking about Jesus, and they're not only revealing God in what they say and do, but they're actually revealing God in the care that they're showing. And I'm not quite sure what the Irish health system would have done without so many of those Indian and Filipino nurses. I said that at one of the earlier sessions, and an Irish nurse came up to me and she said, don't forget us too. And I'm not forgetting the Irish nurses who do such good work and who, in their own way, preach and teach and reveal God through their work. But those folks, I think, reveal for me or exemplify for me people who are living out the prophetic dimension of their baptismal calling. So the kingly dimension. The kingly dimension is about washing feet. It's about ruling, but ruling in a way that's the way of a servant. And I was trying to think of an example of people who govern, who keep an eye on things in the Irish church. And I began to think of those who failed. people like me, a provincial, or people like bishops, failed to keep an eye on things and to keep things safe. And one of the sad stories of the last 20 years is that people who should have known better didn't keep an eye out for those who were weakest and didn't look after children in a way that they should have. So we're learning, and we have to learn to do things better. But the future and the present is really where many lay people, lay men and women, have taken on the responsibility to ensure that things are done better. So, for example, here in this church, we have a lay man, a married man with 3 children, who is our local safeguarding rep. He's also the sacristan, but he keeps an eye to make sure that things are done properly and that everybody is kept safe, children and those who work with them. But in every parish in Ireland, in every church in Ireland, in every diocese in Ireland, there are local safeguarding reps. It's taken us a while to learn, but we have learned. But those folks who engage as local safeguarding reps are baptized men and women who exercise that kingly function, that governance function, that keeping an eye function in the church, and they're doing so out of their baptismal commitment. Not only those folks who are involved in safeguarding, but men and women who are involved in parish pastoral councils, who are involved as youth ministers or in music ministry, in so many other ways where people offer servant leadership in their parishes and in their local communities. So those are the priest, prophet and kingly dimensions of our baptismal calling. And I want now to go back to Jean Valjean. You see, Jean Valjean, the hero of Les Mis, he starts off life in a mess. He is miserable. When you see the opening scenes of the film or of the show, he's miserable. He's one of those who is in misery. But he encounters a bishop who's extraordinarily generous to him. And that in some ways is his baptism. His life is in some way transformed. And he becomes priestly, prophetic and kingly. He's priestly in that he makes sacrifices and he sanctifies. He makes sacrifices for a woman called Francine, for a woman who becomes his daughter called Cosette. And he makes sacrifices for a man who's unjustly accused of something. He's also prophetic in that he reveals God in his actions and in his words. And he's kingly in the sense that he governs, he's the mayor of the town, and he governs that town with compassion and mercy. So he embodies in some ways the priestly, prophetic and kingly dimensions of baptism. And I want to finish with this. In some ways, Lent is all about redemption, the mission of redemption. And that's the mission of redemptorists, to bring redemption to those who are miserable. And there's a lot of misery in Ireland today. But we don't do it on our own, because that is God's mission. The mission of redemption is God's mission. And we share it with all the baptized. And so part of the challenge of these days is for all of us who are baptized to go from here, these 9 days of Novena, and to be priestly and prophetic and kingly in an Ireland that needs redemption and needs good news. So hear the challenge, feel the challenge to all of us to preach redemption in the Ireland of today. Not an easy challenge. Let me read some of the petitions if I can find them here. These petitions, some of them will bring a smile to your face, but many of them would bring a tear to your eye or break your heart. This one brings a smile, I think. Dear St. Gerard, can you please help me do well in school? Help me to be kind to people and make me enjoy your Novena. Sounds like this person isn't enjoying it so much. Well, here's hoping the next 5 days will be better. This one will break your heart. Dear St. Gerard, please help me. I really need to stop using drugs. Help me, as I don't seem to be able to do it alone, and I'm scared. If the person who wrote that petition is here tonight, don't do it alone. Talk to someone. Seek help. But let's pray for that person. Dear St. Gerard, please help me to become a mother when God says it's the right time. I've had 3 miscarriages. Dear St. Gerard, please help my brother-in-law who was suicidal. Thank goodness he received support and is on the mend now. Dear St. Gerard, please help my dad get better. Help him to realise he needs help. We don't know the stories, very difficult and painful stories that lie behind some of these petitions. But we pray for them all.